Okay, so guys, this is module 2, and we are moving to the most interesting part, I would say, which is called world building. You know, there are some very important things on the mindset level that need to be taken into account if you want to develop the IP that, you know, has a chance. Let me put it this way. There is no consistent vocabulary on world building, IP development, and this leads to a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions and mistakes ultimately, because there is a difference between storytelling, world building, and commercial IP development. It's not that it's something unique when people say, like, you know, it's important that you build the immersive world, especially if you develop a game. So it's kind of commonplace, you know, like you don't surprise anyone if you say that worlds are great, you know, like immersive, believable worlds. But then again, people go like, yeah. And everyone continues to do their own thing, right? So I was looking for a way to kind of show on data that focusing on fictional world is beneficial strategically. Everything that we'll be talking about is as if your plan is to build something lasting for a couple of decades at least, and something that can span different platforms in games and beyond games, PC, console, video streaming, movies, comics, books, and be profitable. And so I was trying to figure out how you can bring some rational argument about the importance of fictional world in the entertainment product. You know, there is rating aggregator, which is called Metacritic, right? And pretty much everyone in games and in movies knows what Metacritic is. It's a rating aggregator. They aggregate reviews from multiple media outlets that write reviews about movies, games. And you may think that, like, who cares, right? But the thing is that they're doing something right. It is common knowledge that very often the bonuses of executive management, like C-level management in big entertainment companies, is tied to average Metacritic rating of the product they're working with. And you may say that those corporate people are just stupid, but that's, you know, not in this case. The other thing that you will notice, if you are seriously involved in game development, there's a number of things you do when you develop a game or any entertainment product for that matter. The most common situation is that people don't really care whom they're building for, right? Yeah, that's kind of, everyone says that you need to figure out the market. By market, we mean target audience. Who specifically are you building for? Your game, your movie, your comic book, whatever, your smartphone. And understanding your target segment kind of empowers you to be a little bit more confident in this uncertainty of product development and marketing, especially in entertainment. You know, like it's not like someone specifically asked you to do something, right? So you need to figure out on your own, like what would be right thing to do for this specific target audience, right? And so there's a number of things that you do while you develop, let's say, video game, and you constantly track and update your knowledge about this target segment that you chose. And so you track that, and then you also track what's going on from the development standpoint. And there's a number of tools for that. And you do that to make sure that you are on track, basically, right? Your main goal will be, to put it short, to know or try to know before the game is launched what the perception will be, right? And when you do that, when you use all those tools, you will have pretty good idea. Like on any stage of development, you will be able to tell that, like, you know, this is 6.5 out of 10 right now. And we will need this much time to get it to, I don't know, 8.5, because that's like what everyone wants. You do all those measurements and all those to figure out how good you are with the product, and do you have any chances on launch date to meet the audience expectations, investors expectations, your own expectations, and stuff like that. So when you do that, you surprisingly see that your game is nested in the category like games like this game. And you start to understand this category, and knowing what you know about your product, you start to understand why this or that game in the category did well or not. This makes you then realize that this metascore in most of the times is very, very, very accurate. And it's amazing because it's supposed to be based on game reviews, right? Those game reviews are written by journalists. And what the fuck journalists know about games, right? I mean, like, of course, they're gamers and all that, but we used to think that it's super subjective opinion of a given journalist, right? But then you realize that this thing actually makes a lot of sense. You start to understand that this is really, really interesting and valuable source of valuation. And the good news is that it exists for a very long time. And so, and you can look in retrospect what was happening, because they have all types of filters to their rating system, like by platform, obviously by time frame. And then there's very interesting rating, which is called top 100 games of all time and all platforms. So it's like greatest of all time, the best of the best of the best. So the ones that made the most cultural impact. And normally this will be represented as also a commercial success. So like it's very rare occasion that the game is high on Metacritic and didn't do very well commercially. So you start paying attention to Metacritic, right? And so I did that. I looked at this rating, which is called Metacritic Top 100 all time and all platforms. And I tried to see what's going on there, right? So, I'm, besides being very much involved in video games, I'm also very passionate movie fan, right? I have a list on IMDb, and I add movies and TV series that I watched, and it's like a little bit more than 2,000 titles, and many of them I watched like way more than I should. I mean, like 20 times, 30 times. So you can imagine like how many hours is that. And so IMDb is also one of the important rating systems, but it's kind of movie only. Spending time on IMDb, they have IMDb top 250, right? Very famous rating. And what happens with IMDb top 250 is evolution, right? It changes over time. Even though that like there are dominant franchises in movies, every couple of years at least something happens and new titles show up in IMDb top 250. And it's interesting, and they can get to top 10, no problem. And I thought, that's interesting. Let's see what's going on with Metacritic top 100 games of all time. And what you see in that rating is basically that new developments of the same franchise keep getting into that rating. So you will see like 10 Final Fantasies, 20 Super Mario titles, right? Several Elder Scrolls titles, several God of War titles. And so it's like franchises kind of updating themselves in that list. And I thought, yeah, well, that's interesting. And then I thought, okay, phone games have a lot of investment, a lot of people working there. They pretend that they're games, that they're part of the games industry. And you would think that, at least 10 years is all about mobile. And then indie, thanks to Gabe and thanks to Steam. And that, again, started like 10, 15 years ago. We have this movement of indie developers. So like we have both mobile and indie as a very hyped up, areas. And when you look at Metacritic top 100 of all time and all platforms, which is important, you would find like 5 indie games, like Disco Elysium. And you will find 0 mobile games, which is interesting. So I thought like, yeah, what could be the reason for that? And I believe now that the reason for that is that mobile games and indie games are obsessed with mechanics, right? If you think about it, you will see that I'm most probably right, especially when you have something to compare, right? When you have these top 100 games of all time, all platforms in front of you, when you try to remember what happened in a mobile and indie scene for the last 10 years, you will see that it's all mechanic based, sometimes storytelling for indies. And there's zero world building. No one came up with a universe, let's say, where people would love to spend time. Right. And those majors from AAA studios with their AAA franchises, they are doing exactly that. They're developing, expanding, and scaling fictional worlds. Right. And so that's something like that. That's a lengthy intro to the topic. So, what I was trying to show you is that there are like rational and objective ways to see that immersive world is good for your business. So we have basically 15 things to cover, right? And today we're covering the first thing. And the first thing is universe design. And by universe design, we mean that your universe that you are designing, like your fictional world, has architecture and setting. And you need to figure that out before you do anything else. And yeah, this is something that I was trying to explain previously, right? So there is a difference between a fictional world and mechanic based or meme based or funny character based or cool story based entertainment. Fictional world and something that people also call IP, right? Without really explaining what they mean. But what it really means, it's a commercial entertainment product designed as a believable living world with the intention to become a cross-media franchise. That's what IP means. It's a commercial entertainment product, which means that it's made for someone specifically with intention to kind of interest and profit. It is designed as a believable living world, so something where people may behave as if it's real, right? At least in certain situations, like at home in front of their computer. And the third part is that it is designed with intention to become cross-media or cross-platform franchise, right? Like The Witcher or Avengers or Star Wars. And here on this slide, I used first products in the franchise, right? So it's like first Iron Man, first Star Wars. Because right now, when you look at Iron Man or Star Wars or Alien or any of those, you have the perception of this immense franchise that stands behind that, right? But at the time when they were released first, they were just another product, but they were done right. And on the right, you have like all common misunderstandings, right? Like what people do, when they think that they are developing the IP, right? It could be a mechanic-based thing. It could be a funny or meme-based or satirical thing. It could be a memorable character, or it could be a story-based thing, right? But also they have the limitation, because normally when you do something like mechanic or character and story-based, even if this thing kind of worked, normally you will find yourself in a situation where if you want to continue, you need to do something new, because these things, they don't have this capacity for scaling. And on the contrary, the IP or this fictional world is designed in a way that it has this scaling potential. If there is a number of people, like a few million people who are loyal fans of your product, right, then it's way easier to give them something within this existing world than say like, hey, you remember I did that shooter about like cats, right? So now I'm making the RPG whatever, about hedgehogs. And they will be like, yeah, okay, maybe I will check this out, right? And if you have the fictional world, it works way easier because people are already immersed. They spend a lot of time with your product. They get used to visuals. They kind of spend like several hundred hours looking at the same character, which is, by the way, branded image, right? And so they have all psychological and aesthetic prerequisites to be easily converted into the next iteration of the same thing. Yeah. And so moving to world building, so there are two big mistakes that people do when they approach world building. First mistake is that people often associate world building with storytelling and writing. And that's wrong. This is not the case, and they are not the same. Their relations are like front end and back end. Okay. And it's a key, let's say, mindset challenge that people need to solve before they can even start to develop IPs, right? In the previous model, had this slide, right, about the differences between real world and fictional world's business. And the important point there was that the core value, the reason people pay you, is very different in real world's business and fictional world's business. In real world's business, people pay you for basically a thing, right, a stock holding unit. And in the fictional world's business, people pay you for the believable fictional world experience. Right. And if you jump to storytelling, and for example, you developed the best story ever, but it's based in, let's say, in real world, right? In our reality. This means that you kind of developed the story, that's okay, but you completely skipped the world building. And now you have a story which is nested into the world that is not yours, right? You kind of skipped the fundamentals and jumped into picking up paint color for the walls, which is nice and important, but it needs to be done at a certain time, and there is some order of things, right, that need to be done to build something that makes sense and lasts long, right? Storytelling happens after world building as a, kind of detailization of everything that you designed for your universe. And then there is a second mistake. The second mistake, when people approach IP development and world building, they misunderstand it with choosing the setting. A lot of times you will hear something like, yeah, hey, well, we have like fantasy or dark fantasy, sci-fi world. And that's it. There's nothing there. Unless there is someone on the team who is obsessed with, again, storytelling. That's not how it works. Before you choose the setting and start figuring out lore and stories and all of that, you need to clearly define the architecture of your universe, of your fictional world. If you were to build the amusement park, you first need to design the layout of the whole thing. And only after that, you can start building attractions and picking up the colors for the hot dog booth. So there's some order of steps that you need to take. And so let's see how the universe architecture looks like. It consists of two important parts. So yeah, your universe architecture looks like that. You have, think of it as like a left hemisphere and right hemisphere of the brain, somebody's brain. Like imagine that this is a person, and left hemisphere is architecture because it's rational and kind of logical, and right hemisphere is setting because it's, let's say, aesthetical and not necessarily rational. And so having solved those two, you can then go to picking the genre, and after you figure that out, you can go and embed the cross-media potential into your universe. And that's kind of the framework, how it works. We mentioned already that everyone knows that, let's say in marketing or in product management, you first need to define the target market and then start developing something. But people normally start developing something and then start, kind of figuring out who now can buy this. And here you will have normally the same situation where people will be they will already have the setting in mind, because from early childhood they were fans of cyberpunk or sci-fi or fantasy or alternative history and always wanted to do something like that. That's okay. You can start from there, but you still need to go through all the steps. And when you go through all the steps, sometimes you will see that the choice of setting should be conscious or strategic choice, because setting is something that helps your architecture to work in the best way. Now, architecture consists of 5 steps or 5 things that you need to consider. It's, as you can see on slide, is unit of action, type of interaction, place of interaction, pressure, and believability. What does it mean? It means that you need to get to the place where you're talking systems. So let's take Game of Thrones. If you ask anyone what Game of Thrones is, normally you will have the answer like that's fantasy or dark fantasy or political military fantasy. But that's not that. It's setting. And what Game of Thrones really is a system where George Martin took basic human motivations like valor, greed, lust, almost like deadly sins and, the whatever is the opposite of the deadly sins. He kind of added different variations of the same motivation. So you could be brave and selfish, you could be brave and courageous, you could be greedy and murderous, or you could be just greedy because money for the sake of money. You can literally put it into the spreadsheet, right? You would have the basic motivations and variations of those basic motivations. So that's what is called unit of action, right? So it's like what is what is the subject, right, of this universe. So people usually mix unit of action with characters. Again, getting back to Game of Thrones, the units of action in Game of Thrones will work absolutely fine if they would not have any names. They are self-evidently obvious human motivations. You can literally call characters of Game of Thrones by those motivations, like the brave guy or pretty girl. Or let's give another example. Let's take Altered Carbon, cyberpunk universe. In Altered Carbon, the unit of action will be the memory stack, the thing that contains the human psyche, and the sleeve, which is the body in which the memory stack is inserted, right? And basically those are units of action of Altered Carbon, because again, it doesn't matter what are the names of the characters, because anyone can virtually be anyone else. If you change the stack from one sleeve to another, it's the same sleeve but with different psyche, right? With like different personality inside. And like the whole dynamic of the Altered Carbon universe, it's all about stacks changing places in different sleeves, and sleeves being destroyed and stacks being copied and re-sleeved into different sleeves. And so the main actors, right, of this universe are memory stacks and sleeves, which are like the bodies, right? And then they have names and some histories, but that's already storytelling, right? So the thing that keeps you involved and grabs your attention is this play of stacks changing sleeves, basically, right? And what can happen if you put the male stack into the female sleeve? What will happen if Ortega will take her grandma's stack and put it into the sleeve of a violent criminal, right, to get her to the family dinner. And what will happen to Takeshi after whatever 300 years without the sleeve? The main, like the unit of action, units, let's say, of action are stacks and sleeves in Altered Carbon. The same way in Game of Thrones, the units of action are like visualized basic motivations of humans, right? Like greed, honor, bravery, and things like that, right? So then, when you figure that out for your world that you are trying to build, you need to define what types of interactions between those units of actions will be happening in your world, right? So the thing here is that you may say, like, yeah, whatever may happen, but that's true for the real world, but we're talking about fictional world, and in real world, interactions between entities could be very, very complex. So, for example, if you take interaction between one human and the other human, it will be like millions of types of interactions that may happen between them. And so in fictional world, you can't do that because first of all, it's impossible, and second of all, it's not needed. Well, think of it as a like TV show, right? So you may have all different units of action, but the type of interaction that is kind of allowed in your world is only this, or maybe two things, right? So people can fight and dance, right? And that's the way how they interact, right? So they either fighting or dancing. So you will focus on maybe one or two types of interactions, right? Again, getting back to Game of Thrones, there will be two major types of maybe three types of interactions. It's a fight, it's betrayal, and personal, most often sexual relationship, right? And so you have units of action that are basic motivations, and then the rules of like the types of interactions between them are limited to basically three things. They either fight or betray or kind of have sex with each other. And that's it, because you can always have dialogues of NPCs, and whatever. So that's not prohibited. But meaningful interactions, and by meaningful interactions, we mean interactions that kind of change something of importance. It's very important to have it like below 3, unless there's a very, very good reason to make more, because sometimes you can come up with the system where you will have more than 3, but that's kind of the outlier, right? And again, getting back to George Martin, it's the world or universe where you have very clear representations of human motivations that either fight or betray or have sex with each other. And you're like, I can see where it can go if I go on with development of this universe, right? Which brings us to a third point, which is called place of interaction. So when you have a unit of action and they interact, that needs to happen somewhere. Again, in real world, it may happen anywhere you want. In fictional world, you need to narrow it down. It should be, like you can play football anywhere you want, but the football that matters happens on the football stadium, right? So you need to define what would be the places where meaningful interactions between units of action happen. Is it a special place like Thunderdome in Mad Max? Is it, let's say, Night City? It could be, it could be places as localized as like a couple of rooms and as broad as like different star systems. So you need to figure out based on unit of action and type of interactions where it will make the most sense. So you can go as narrow as like it's all happening only in one place. Like remember what was the movie? Like pretty much any fighting movie from the 80s and 90s will be, first 10 minutes they will show you the background of the characters, and then 1 hour and a half they will show you the same place, which is some kind of ring, right, or octagon. The units of action are not characters but different styles of martial arts. Those will be the units of action in the fighting movie, right? Type of interaction will be obviously fighting. That's why you won't see a lot of love stories in fighting movies. The place of interaction, given the fact that this is a martial arts styles clashing in the fight, then obviously the place of interaction is something resembling the boxing ring or the octagon or whatever, like the place where people fight. And it can go as narrow as like the same place where all the participants meet each other to fight. Or it can be as diverse as, let's say, at least in one of the Mortal Kombats, where they had fights everywhere. But it was either picturesque or meaningful place, right? It was not like they were fighting all over the place, right? It was a very specific place where the fighters will meet and fight with each other. And to that place, they would need to have some kind of a commute, right? So they can't go out of the room and fight in the corridor. They will need to make it to this very special place and have a fight there. So you kind of get the point, right? So it could be different depending again on what units of action you chose, what type of interaction you chose. Then the place of interaction will be additionally constrained by the previous two, right? Or it kind of informs you more and more, like when you understand the unit of action, you understand the type of interaction. It's a deeper understanding of what will work better, right? Then when you did that, you need something that is called pressure on the system, right? Because if you tell somebody like, let's again get back to George Martin and Game of Thrones. Okay, you have basic human motivations. They fight, betray, or kind of sleep with each other. And they do it in dramatic, atmospheric places. And that would be the right way to describe it. It's because it's the castle or like dramatic rock or the field in front of the capital city, or desert, or these buildings made from ice, so it's somewhat dramatic and emotionally charged place, right? And then somebody may tell you like, yeah, okay, but I've seen it once, I've seen it twice, why should I watch 8 episodes or whatever, or read like 10 books? You can answer to that question by coming up with some words to explain it. But what you can do, you can put pressure on the system. And in case of Game of Thrones, this pressure on the system was inevitable, life-stopping, cataclysmic event, which in our modern terms is called zombie apocalypse. And so this pressure on the system, it was equally unavoidable for any character in this universe, right? It doesn't matter. You are the richest person in the world, you are the strongest, you have the biggest army, you have the fleet, or whatever, right? When you put the pressure on the system, it has to be something that is unavoidable for any participant, like any unit of action in your universe. And it needs to be something that happens no matter what, and no one can do anything about it. because by that you will create the dynamic of either, like the shrinking map, like in Battle Royale, and your units of action will have to interact, more and more frequently because of this imaginary, like, the map is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and they get closer and closer and closer together, and there's more and more and more and more interactions. It doesn't necessarily need to be something that will kill everyone, right? Even though it's cool. It could be something that, I don't know, resets the rules every once in a while, or lack of resources, right? So that's that every time, like, that's the hardest thing people encounter during the architecture of the universe, because there are different levels of abstraction. The author, like the creator of the universe, tends to kind of imply their personal understanding of what is catastrophic and what is not, and it's not always kind of obvious for everyone, even in the group, not in the entire world, that this is the the right level of catastrophe. Or people go too broad, like not very well described danger of general hazard to everything, right? Which brings us to the last point for today, which is called believability. Believability, other than it's a cool word to say, believability, it's a kind of it's a test for everything that you did during the first 4 stages. Because when you come up with the unit of action, the type of interaction, the place of interaction, and the pressure on this system, then you need to make a step back and ask yourself a question: does this make sense? Because one of your biggest and most dangerous enemies is subconscious disbelief, right? Because people do some lazy things that could be described as this and that happens in my universe because of reasons, because I just said so. Let's use the previous examples. If you have units of action, like in the fighting movie, like the blood sport, I remind you that the units of action are not the fighters and not the characters of the movie. Units of action are different martial arts styles. That's important. Then type of interaction between those units of action is obviously fighting, right? And place of interaction, depending on what type of franchise you're talking about, will be either the single place where everything happens, right? Or it could be multiple places where your units of action will interact with each other. And the pressure for that will be that there can be only one, right? It's too many of you, right? Only one can be the best of the best of the best. And the time is ticking, right? Now, when it comes to believability, this makes a lot of sense, because even though the units of action are not humans but the martial arts styles, you still kind of associate them with humans, because you know that people who are into martial arts, they are competitive and disagreeable. So when somebody tells you that, hey, here's the different styles of martial arts, first of all, different styles of martial arts makes sense for you, right? You're like, yeah, okay, I know that there are martial arts and there could be different styles of those, right? Okay. And then they tell you that they interact in the form of a fight. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense, right? Because otherwise, if for some reason the type of interaction will be the discussion club, you'll be like maybe it could be a comedy, right? It's unexpected in a bad way, right? Because you were like, yeah, fighting, yeah, that makes sense. They will fight, yeah, that makes sense. If they don't fight and do something else, that's strange. That brings this subconscious disbelief that kind of destroys everything, and you are not interested already, right? Doesn't matter what people will tell you next. As soon as you got that subconscious disbelief, it's pretty much over. So, and then the place of interaction also needs to make place, because someone tells that it's these styles of martial arts that interact in a form of fight makes sense, and the place is either like arena, like the single arena, or multiple arenas with beautiful or strange or symbolic decorations. You're like, yeah, makes sense, and also it is cool, right? And then when someone says that there's the pressure, and the pressure is that there could be only one of them who is the best of the best of the best, and the time is ticking and it needs to be solved in a week, that also makes sense for you, because you know that these people are competitive and want to prove that they are better than everyone else, and that makes a lot of sense, because otherwise, if it will be the unit of action will be the nurse, right, then the whole system will fall apart, because like no one will believe that the prime motivation of the nurse is to prove that she's better than the other nurse, right? Because like the overall perception of the profession is that it is about caring, like and sacrificing self for the sake of others, and you will immediately hit that subconscious disbelief, right? That's the architecture. So the unit of action, again, it's not character. It's two or sometimes more entities that interact with each other to generate what ultimately leads to excitement of the audience, right, for which it is made, right? So that's the unit of action. The type of interaction, again, can't be everything in the world. It needs to be narrowed down to very specific types of interaction that are relevant for your unit of action. It makes sense that these units of action will interact in such a manner, right? Or it's place of interaction, again, place of interaction that makes sense as a place where the units of action engage into interactions. The pressure should make sense, that it's relevant and affects the intensity of interaction, right? And then the believability. The whole thing, like the whole architecture, should be believable, right? If you use analogies, because it's all about analogies and abstractions. And in order to check yourself that you didn't go too far with abstractions and analogies, you need this last point of believability check. You can do it yourself. You can do it with people, like just the people that you know, and not in a way like, do they like it or not, but in a way like, does it make sense? Is it believable, right? That these things may happen with these actors, right, in the system under this type of pressure. Yeah, so that's about architecture of your fictional world or universe, if you like. And that's enough for today. Next time we'll move from architecture to setting and talk about how you pick up a setting and how you do it as a strategic choice, right? Because when you finish your architecture, you will have a very nice model, the abstract model, and it doesn't have any aesthetical features. And you need to ask yourself and to think very well, which setting will be beneficial for this abstract model that you came up with? Because again, getting back to Game of Thrones, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be fantasy other than dragons, right? You can easily imagine a Game of Thrones in 21st century. A couple of lines about temporal anomaly, and then here you have dragons in New York or whatever. You decide in what form and how you kind of land it on your architecture, right? But again, it's a topic for the next module, right? The idea for today is that think of architecture as backend and setting as a front end. Both are super important, but everything needs to be done at the right place at the right time and to serve its purpose, right? The purpose of architecture is the foundation, it's the mechanism that will evoke the most powerful and meaningful emotions from your audience. The architecture is the answer why people love football. The setting will be like the color of the the ball, the uniform, and like the logos of different football clubs and stadiums and all that. So next time I'll talk about the setting. Feel free to ask any questions because I can imagine this topic could be kind of hard to digest. Thanks for watching. Cheers. See you next time.